The Catteni Chronicles by Anne McCaffery. Do you ever need like a reading hug, like reading comfort food, reading armchair by the fire with a throw rug and a hot chocolate, and just I recently needed this kind of reading comfort, and so I bought my third copy of the Catteni sequence. This is the first book. Please excuse the cover. I did not choose this cover. It should have like an alien planet and a spaceship, and this is not. I'm sorry. Anyway, I bought my third copy because I wore my first copy out, and I have hardcovers, but they're in storage in another country, and that sucks, and whatever. My comfort food. I'm sure you have your own series that you come back to like again and again when you just, you know, you need a book that you're gonna love. And on this channel, I want to get into reading books, not the ones that are super popular and coming out now, even though that's probably going to get me less and less views, but I want to read the books that are so precious to you that you will keep coming back to them again and again and again. But I don't know what you're reading, so I'm going to tell you about my comfort food. This book has seeped into my soul. This series, this is normal. What's in here is normal. The economy in here is normal. The way relationships are structured, normal. The way prose is written, the pace at which the book has to take place, like, this is the standard against which I measure everything else. So come along for some comfort reading, for a really fun ride with optimism to rival Project Hail Mary, but with survivalist overtones instead of sciencey ones. So.
Before we get to the juicy bits, let's give you the movie trailer version of what happens in this trilogy. You know, just enough spoilers to whet your appetite. The Catteni aliens have swooped down on Earth and enslaved whole cities, carrying the populations to other enslaved planets. Crispa Johnson was taken from Denver, and through some twists, she ends up saving a high-ranked officer, Zainal, from being killed. And they both get dumped, along with around 1,000 others, mostly human, but other aliens too, on an ostensibly uninhabited planet. They are dumped with knives, hatchets, blankets, and the most basic first aid kits ever. If they survive and make a somewhat habitable community, then the Catteni will return and steal what they create and enslave them again. Hooray! But this drop has a few advantages. The planet isn't entirely uninhabited because there's some unsupervised high-tech farm machinery operational. There's also weirdly abundant food. They have Sergeant Chuck Mitford to get everyone organized and optimistic. The mysterious aliens that don't live on the planet also offer indirect aid. And then there is that Catteni Zainal that Chris convinces everyone to use instead of kill. Over the series, the mystery of the mech makers, aka the farmers of the whole planet, is explored, and the dropped people go from hand-to-mouth survival to freeing the galaxy from the oppressive rule of the Eossi, because it turns out that the Catteni are just the henchmen for another evil race of quasi-immortal aliens, the Eossi. If anyone in Hollywood is listening and wants to make a series of movies as optimistic as Project Hail Mary, please make the first 3 books of the Catteni series. Please. There is a 4th book, but we don't go there. The books in order are Freedom's Landing, Freedom's Choice, Freedom's Challenge, and Freedom's Coffee Run. I mean Freedom's Ransom. But the last one happens after freeing the galaxy, and it just lacks oomph. I read it once a long time ago, and I bought it to reread now, but I did. but I also DNF'd. Now, is this book an accessible read? Yes. Okay, moving on. No, let's do this properly. Is it comprehensible if you're sleep deprived and or overworked? Yes, provided you don't want to look things up. You can read this and skip over the delightful vocabulary gems that Anne drops in. There's enough context to figure out what the unknown word means, so you don't need to look things up like I did. But just for fun, here's a smattering of ones I looked up, or I remember looking up on previous reads. Filial, facetious, expectorating, Wilhelm, alimentary, agely, patrician, punctiliously, aphorisms, supercilious, imperious, temporizing. You get the picture. What I find so delightful about this vocabulary is that it's dropped into a space opera. Like, the prose in here is not pretty. There's barely any metaphors or quirky observations. This is action and dialogue and thinking that leads to decisions to take action. I don't know if the modern reader is assumed to be dumber, more impatient, or if Anne McCaffery should have been told to cut it out because she was showing off. Whatever, there's fun words to learn if you want, but they don't stop you following the otherwise straightforward prose when you're sleep deprived. Mood stabilizing. I like to tell you if a book might make you spiral emotionally. And this series is top of the class. You can free the galaxy with a band of fellow misfits and basic tools if you just work together and act outside the box. It's pure fun optimism. Your mood will be lifted. And is it a page turner you'll neglect your responsibilities over? I don't know. Sorry. The problem is I have known all the plot points for years, decades actually. I look forward to my favourite parts, but there's no urgency to get there because I know I love the vast majority of the story, and it's just been so long since I read the series the first time and knew nothing. I will say that while I read, I tracked what percentage of the book I was at when certain events happened, like, at 50% of the way through book 2, that's halfway through the trilogy, Eossi X has proof that the farmer aliens exist and that they have superior technology, which sets off his obsession that allows the trilogy climax to occur. I made these notes as I read, and I must say that the pacing is tight. It doesn't always follow standard story beats. Like, I'm pretty sure the last fifth of the first book should have been the start of the second book, but there's always something that's happening as a result of what just happened and that could drastically alter the plans that are in motion. Which is to say that I think it's a fast-paced novel and I know it has a punchy plot. If you read it for the first time, please tell me and everyone else if you think it's a fast-paced series. Let's start this next section with a kind of disclaimer. The first book in the series was published in 1995, so I probably read it not long after the series was first completed. Anyway, the humans in the series have explored as far as Jupiter and have rudimentary space fighter craft? What do you call a spaceship that fights? I don't know. But they are listening to the news on their Walkmans. It's a weird futuristic from the past thing. Anyway, the Bible has this phrase, "He was a good man in his times," and this book has some good tropes in its times, which is to say they've aged like milk. To be clear, there's some that have aged brilliantly too, but we'll get there. So, hooray, you have Sergeant Mitford absolutely forbidding bigotry towards the aliens and just assuming that there'll be no bigotry toward other human races because, duh, of course we're all in this together. Although I will say there's some awkwardness around how to respect Maasai culture when it's being misogynistic, without bigotry in the third book. Anyway, overall, Anne does a brilliant job around bigotry. Around women's empowerment, that's more complicated. From what I know, speculative fiction was mostly men's business for a long time. I still can't read The Hobbit because it is such a dick fest. Like, I think all the women in it I just mentioned, they're the mother, the sister, the wife, like they have, I don't know how people like The Hobbit, I'm sorry, unpopular opinion. Anyway, that's fantasy. So, Chris, a woman being the point of view character, is progressive all by itself for the time. Though I would argue that Zainal is the protagonist, even though Chris is telling the story. But on top of Chris being the point of view character, she isn't running the camp kitchen or washing the space overalls, like in the classic Lost in Space series, you know, the one where the first season is all black and white, and Penny spends the whole time keeping house on an alien planet. Anyway, Chris is off being a scout, an adventurer, and after the first book, there's always another woman in her team on planet-side adventures. Plus, there's a woman, Sandy, who is a potter, and she's so valued and respected for her contributions that are classically female, which is a whole nother level of respecting women. Like, there's so much to say about the great female representation in this book. Anne even has the main character become a mother in book 2, and she continues to be an awesome character after becoming a good mother. And why is that so amazing? So rare, even now. A mother who's the main character and has children, and it's so common, and yet it's so rare in fiction. Anyway, so that's the awesome part, but there's some cringe bits about women too. The colonists vote that they want Botany, the planet they're dropped on, to be theirs, and that apparently means every woman needs to have a baby. They say like, oh, if you don't want to be a mum, you can just give the baby to the creche. Pregnancy is hard work and dangerous. Props to Anne, she does have the pregnant characters on lighter duties because yes, pregnancy and childbirth and looking after babies is work that benefits everyone, so it should count as work, 100%. But voting that every woman is expected to have at least one child, that's some bold choices. Bold. But the worst bit is that when Chris finds out about this, and bear in mind, she is hooked up with someone she can't genetically reproduce with, so she has to find a different male to be the dad, so it's extra complicated for her. Anyway, she finds out that she's expected to have a baby, and she's pissed off. Legit, in my opinion. But this book, Anne, no. Chris keeps mentally berating herself for being a silly woman about having a baby. I can't. I have had 3 babies. I've had them in hospitals with trained midwives and social support, and it's hard. Even then, no woman is silly for debating whether to have a baby that will grow into a child that needs a primary attachment figure. Creche isn't enough. Babies need a primary caregiver. And in this scenario, that baby needs someone converting their blood into milk to sustain the baby. There's no formula available. That milk giver needs proper nourishment to manage that. While the dinner plate-sized wound in her uterus is healing, and she's awake half the night, and her hormones are experiencing whiplash because there's no backup. If there isn't enough food and shelter for everyone, her body, the new mums all through the community, their bodies might assess that there's insufficient resources to support mother and baby and cut off milk production, which would be not ideal for the baby's continued existence. Like, I think the child-free choice is now sufficiently mainstream that I'm probably preaching to the choir here. Chris isn't silly to be upset that the collective is demanding she have a baby under any circumstances, but especially here on this planet where, the farmers could come back and take all the food that they're using, and the Catteni could come and enslave them and kill the babies, and it just... But silly woman is an insult leveled at classically female characters throughout the series, and at Chris for being hesitant to have a baby. This sexism isn't overwhelming, it's not on every page, but it is grating. Anyway, that's the didn't age well, even though it was progressive in its time bits, and I'm glad to have that female point of view character doing all the awesome things and being a mum and continuing to kick ass. But before I get to the part that I think had the greatest impact on me, besides the brainworm that colonies will have fewer women than men and babies will be a desired addition to the survival metrics within a year, I do want to discuss the notion that Chris is the point of view character while Zainal is the protagonist of this story. There's one other story, another trilogy that I've read that bends the rule that the lead character has to be the one to complete the final battle and win the day. Like, Vernon Dursley can't come to Hogwarts and knock Voldemort on the head with a drill to end the series, and nor can, say, Lupin avenge his friend once Harry has found the last Horcrux. The main character has to be there, has to do the thing that ends the final confrontation. That's the normal way to write a book. The other book that bends this trope is the Kushiel trilogy about Phaedra no Delaunay de Montreve by Jaqueline Carey. Phaedra, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, but Phaedra is a high-class angel whore who winds up saving nations but never goes into battle because that's not what her character would do. There's wars, but she doesn't fight them. And it's kind of genius. Like, women can have worth and influence politics without being the warrior. How is this not the obviously progressive thing to value women doing what we value? Anyway, side note about Kushiel's avatar in the trilogy, I don't like smut. In case you're like, oh, she doesn't like smut, so it must be safe. Kushiel's trilogy was my first encounter with open door romance. Like, seriously open door romance. Smeck scenes that 50 Shades of Grey has no hope of matching. It is a great series with lots of explicit scenes that legitimately move the plot forward, which I would argue the majority of scenes with books with smut do not have those scenes that move the plot forward. It's just dropped in there. So if you want to move from smut to something else, political intrigue or fantasy, the Kushiel trilogy might be your thing. But I digress. Kushiel and Catteni, these two series are the only two stories I have come across where I 100% forgive that the protagonist is female and doesn't do the fighting. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but the Catteni have been oppressed by the Eossi for thousands of years, and humans for only something around 2 to 5 years in total. Like, this is Zainal's story, maybe more than Chris's. And it's fascinating to see that play out at the end. And Chris feels that imbalance as well. Anyway, you've been warned that the end might feel off. It does break convention, but it does it for a reason, and I like it. I try in my book reviews to have a clutch of short tropes and one big focus per book. I think this review, though, has 3 big focuses, and maybe that's because I'm reviewing 3 books, so it's harder to pinpoint things to talk about, but probably because I love this series and understand it so deeply and just want to talk about everything at length. So the three things are bigotry and feminism, a protagonist who doesn't do it all, and finally, the economy. What? I hear you say. Bear with me. Remember how I said that if Chris didn't want to look after her baby, she could just leave it with the creche? Yeah, the economy is different on botany. The colonists get dropped with the barest of essential tools. They hike to a deep cave complex to escape the night crawlers that squirm out of the earth and glisten in the darkness as they eat anything left on soft ground at night. And then a day later, Chris joins a scouting expedition. And then another and another. And each time she comes back to camp, the colonists have made more leaps of civilization. So at first, she sleeps on a bare rock and eats a leg of meat for breakfast with her fingers, but when she comes back from her first expedition, they have rudimentary mattresses and flaming torches on the wall and unfired pottery plates and stew pots. And then the next time she comes back, there's warped glass around the torches and a kiln. And they break the farming machines that are on the planet and use them to make walkie-talkies and early warning devices. And it's so inspiring to read. Like, it has an optimistic view of humanity. So different from that era of dystopian novels that came out not long after I became an adult. I prefer the optimism. Anyway, back to the economy. The original economy is everyone does whatever they can wherever it's needed to make sure everyone survives. There's not a huge amount of strategy. It's hand-to-mouth living. Chris spends her first day at Camp Rock, for example, perched next to a big rock, dressing little animals with her multi-purpose knife, ready to be cooked. And then the economy builds from that communal base. So by the time they move continents, everyone has rostered chores. They have rostered days doing greater good chores. Like washing dishes, digging toilets, making bricks. Because by the time you get to the third book, they're building individual houses. How cool is that? All the things that are necessary to survive are required work for everyone. All of the things that are necessary to survive are provided free at the point of use, like Medicare and the NHS, healthcare in most countries, not the US. Communal housing, there's mess hall food that you can get dine-in or take away. You can get all your groceries, daycare whenever you need it, all at no cost and for no pay. And experts also contribute using their expertise as these basic contributions. So think prostitutes, pilots, potters, psychologists, medics, all the things you need to keep a stable society. And then finally, there's time for side hustles. It's not called side hustles in the book, obviously, because Walkmans. The potter makes decorative things, and actually there's not many side hustles named, but there are colony credits in use by the end of the trilogy that can be swapped for luxuries. So, I absorbed this way of creating an economy as the natural order of things because I read this at a pivotal moment in my life. Can you imagine if, with all the advances in productivity, we were all down to 5 hours of work per week for food, housing, basic clothing, utilities, childcare, medical, and education? 5 hours of work gets you all of that. It's got to be possible. We're working more now than we were. Oh my God. Anyway, we would have no billionaires, but all the basics in exchange for minimal work, and then we can indulge our strengths and passions for the good of the community, but also for luxuries with no fear that we'd ever go without the basics of life. Work without existential dread. And mind blown. like the little lemmings, Oh no! I told you this series had a hopeful outlook. I also, reading this, falsely assumed that raising children for me would be as easy as raising children was for Chris Bjornson. I have a shift of work, so I drop my child at the creche when I need to. Obviously. None of this having to pay for 12 hours, even though I only need 5. No wage-consuming fees for those days. Just Hey, you need childcare to help the community? The community will help you with childcare. I somehow absorbed that ease despite evidence to the contrary in my actual life. I don't know what botany's economy would look like pasted onto Earth. Actually, that's sort of a lie. I rather enjoy pondering what I'd do if I was Sergeant Mitford, aka King for a day, or a year, or a decade, you know. In my first version of this script, I pontificated at length about how Aristotle would call what we call democracy oligarchy, because only the rich and those supported by the rich can afford to campaign to be elected, so it's oligarchy. And that the cure for our oligarchy, not democracy, is citizens' assemblies, which is, it's kind of like a parliament, but instead of being elected, there's this system that's kind of like a jury selection method, and you hold people to account at the end of their term, and it's a representative sample of the yeah, I could go on. I wrote in that first draft that the healthcare and defense isn't supposed to be counted in GDP. That was always supposed to be not included or subtracted from GDP, and yet because it shows that there's a problem with society and not that society is thriving if it has to, be at war or have sick citizens. And in that script, I brushed over how if we weren't going for endless growth and wealth consolidation, we could be down to something like a 5-hour work week to cover all the basics of life. But I fear that you wouldn't want to listen to that, and I'd be called a woke idiot and a fascist pig, so I cut it out. If you would have preferred a political ramble added to your book review, or if you're glad I left it out, please let me know in the comments, because I'm still coming up with how to structure these and what you guys actually want to hear from me. So either way, whether you like me going off on that random tangent or not, I dare say it was absorbing the idealistic lifestyles of the inhabitants of the planet Botany and seeing how greatly it differed from my lived reality that made me forever stuck thinking outside the box of societal norms. It's probably why I've been willing to travel as much as I have. But then again, helping you experience life outside your life is what novels are best at. And there are some, like the Catteni Chronicles for me, that change you forever and will always welcome you like your favorite cardigan, couch, or blanket, all snuggly and warm. Realities that will ever be a more beautiful, functional, freeing world than the one you currently inhabit. And in the base meaning of the word comfort, when you come back to them, they will fortify you to meet the world's challenges.
Please read Anne McCaffery's Freedoms series, the Catteni series. It is so good. And please, I would love to do a series where I'm reviewing one of your favorite books every month. So let me know what they are in the comments. Your evergreen reading gems that you can come back to over and over again, and it will always feel like home. I want to find out what you read as an adolescent that changed you. So please leave recommendations for me in the comments, and like if you like this video, subscribe if you would like to see more that are similar to it, and I will see you next time. Happy reading!